I want to talk to you today about something that's genuinely recognized in medicine and that a great many older adults never think about, yet that's worth understanding. The fact that the early morning hours carry a somewhat higher risk for the heart and why heart problems, including heart attacks, tend to be commoner in the early morning. Because we don't think of the time of day as having anything to do with the heart. Yet there's a genuine pattern. The early morning, roughly the hours around waking, is when heart attacks and certain heart events are somewhat more common due to the body's natural rhythms. So understanding this helps you be sensible without being fearful. So today I want to explain why the early morning is a higher risk time for the heart, what's happening in the body, why this matters, and, most usefully, what sensible things you can do in partnership with your doctor. And I'll keep this calm and balanced because while the early morning pattern is real, the point is sensible understanding and good overall heart care, not fear of the mornings, in partnership with your doctor. This is about an overlooked but genuine pattern and the sensible care it points to. Let me start with the genuine pattern because it's real and worth knowing. There's a genuine recognized pattern that heart attacks and certain other heart events tend to be somewhat more common in the early morning hours, roughly the hours around and after waking, compared to other times of day. This isn't a myth or a scare. It's an observed pattern in the timing of heart events, reflecting the body's natural daily rhythms and what happens physically as you wake and rise. Now, let me be balanced immediately. This is a relative pattern, a somewhat higher risk at that time, not a guarantee that anything will happen, and heart events can occur at any time. So, the point isn't to fear the mornings, but to understand the pattern and take sensible care. So there's a genuine pattern that heart events are somewhat commoner in the early morning hours due to the body's natural rhythms. A relative pattern reflecting what happens as you wake and rise, not a cause for fear of mornings. So understanding that the early morning carries a somewhat higher heart risk is the foundation. So heart events are genuinely somewhat commoner in the early morning. Let me explain what's happening in the body because the reasons make sense of it. Several natural changes in the body in the early morning hours as you move from sleep to waking and rising likely contribute to this higher risk pattern. The body has natural daily rhythms, circadian rhythms, and in the early morning as you prepare to wake and become active, there's a natural surge in certain stress hormones and nervous system activity. This is associated with a rise in blood pressure and heart rate around waking, the morning blood pressure surge I've discussed. The blood may also be somewhat more prone to clotting at that time, due to natural rhythms in the clotting system. And the transition from lying asleep to rising and becoming active places new demands on the heart. So these combined changes, the hormone surge, the rise in blood pressure and heart rate, the greater clotting tendency, and the demands of becoming active, mean the early morning places more stress on the cardiovascular system, contributing to the higher risk pattern. So in the early morning, natural rhythms cause a surge in stress hormones, a rise in blood pressure and heart rate, a greater clotting tendency, and the demands of rising, which together place more stress on the heart, explaining the pattern. So natural morning rhythms place extra stress on the heart, so the body's morning changes raise cardiac stress. Let me connect this to a few specific things because it ties together themes. This early morning pattern connects to a few things I've discussed. It relates to the morning blood pressure surge, the natural rise in blood pressure around waking, which is part of why blood pressure control matters and why your doctor considers the timing of blood pressure medication. It relates to the demands of sudden activity, since leaping out of bed and immediately exerting yourself adds to the morning stress on the heart. And it's why taking prescribed heart and blood pressure medications as directed, including any timed for the morning, matters. So they're working during this higher risk period. So the early morning pattern connects to the morning blood pressure surge, the demands of sudden morning activity, and the importance of taking prescribed medications as directed to cover this period. So the pattern ties to blood pressure, morning activity, and medication timing. So it connects to blood pressure surges, morning exertion, and medications. So several familiar themes come together here. Let me explain why this matters, because it's about sensible care, not fear. This pattern matters not as a reason to fear the mornings, but as a reason for sensible care in a few ways. It reinforces the importance of good overall heart care, controlling blood pressure, cholesterol, and other risks, and taking prescribed medications consistently, since well-managed risks lower your risk at all times, including the higher risk morning. It suggests being sensible about how you start your day, not leaping into sudden heavy exertion, first thing. And it reinforces recognizing heart attack and stroke symptoms and acting on them urgently, including in the morning when they're somewhat commoner. So, the pattern matters as a prompt for good overall heart care, a sensible morning routine, and readiness to recognize and act on symptoms rather than as a cause for fear. So, this matters as a reason for sensible heart care, a sensible start to the day, and symptom readiness, not fear of mornings. So the pattern prompts sensible care, not fear. So it matters for sensible care, not worry. Let me give you the sensible things you can do, because they're practical and reassuring. Here are sensible things you can do, given the early morning pattern, all part of good general heart care. First, look after your overall heart health, managing blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, weight, smoking, and activity, since this lowers your risk at all times, including mornings, and is the most important thing. Second, take your prescribed medications consistently and as directed, including any time for the morning or to cover the morning period, and never stop them on your own, discussing timing with your doctor. Third, start your day gently, not leaping out of bed into sudden heavy exertion, but rising at a reasonable pace, perhaps sitting a moment before standing, as I've discussed for blood pressure, and easing into activity rather than, say, immediately doing something very strenuous. Fourth, stay well hydrated, since overnight you can become somewhat dehydrated, which I've discussed strains the heart. And fifth, recognize heart attack and stroke symptoms and be ready to act urgently, including in the morning. So, given the early morning pattern, look after your overall heart health. Take medications as directed, start your day gently, stay hydrated, and be ready to recognize and act on symptoms. All sensible care rather than fear. So, good heart care, gentle mornings, hydration, and symptom readiness are the sensible responses. So, sensible overall care and a gentle start to the day are the response. Let me reinforce the emergency readiness point, because it's crucial at any time. Crucially, since heart attacks and strokes are somewhat commoner in the morning but can occur any time, be ready to recognize and act on their symptoms. As I've discussed, treat as a possible heart attack and call emergency services immediately for chest discomfort or pressure, breathlessness, sweating, nausea, or pain in the arm, jaw, shoulder, or back, and as a possible stroke for sudden weakness, face drooping, speech difficulty, sudden vision changes, or sudden confusion, remembering fast. Don't dismiss morning symptoms as just waking up unwell or stiffness, but heed genuine heart attack or stroke symptoms, and act urgently since prompt response saves lives at any time, including the morning. So, be ready to recognize and act urgently on heart attack and stroke symptoms at any time, including the higher risk morning, calling emergency services, and not dismissing them. So, emergency readiness matters at all times, including mornings. So, be ready to act on symptoms, mornings included. Let me paint you a quick picture of how this helps. Picture a man in his 70s who knows nothing of the early morning pattern, leaps out of bed each morning and immediately does something strenuous, is somewhat dehydrated overnight, and is casual about his blood pressure medication timing, all adding avoidable stress during the naturally higher risk morning. Then he learns the pattern, understanding that the early morning carries a somewhat higher heart risk due to natural rhythms. He doesn't fear it, but takes sensible care. He keeps his overall heart health well managed, takes his medications consistently, and discusses timing with his doctor, rises and eases into his day more gently rather than leaping into exertion, stays hydrated, and knows to act urgently on any heart attack or stroke symptoms. He's reduced avoidable morning stress on his heart and is well prepared, all through sensible care rather than worry. The same man, but understanding the pattern and taking sensible care, looked after his heart through a higher risk time without fear. That contrast is exactly why understanding this overlooked pattern sensibly matters. Let me speak briefly to those of you caring for an older parent or partner. Understand that the early morning carries a somewhat higher heart risk due to the body's natural rhythms. A real but relative pattern, not a cause for fear. You can help by supporting good overall heart care, managing risks and taking medications consistently and as directed, encouraging a gentle start to the day rather than leaping into sudden exertion, supporting good hydration, and ensuring readiness to recognize and act urgently on heart attack and stroke symptoms, including in the morning. Discourage fear of mornings, focusing instead on sensible care. And if heart or blood pressure medication timing is a question, encourage discussing it with the doctor. Helping a loved one understand the pattern and take sensible care looks after their heart through a higher risk time without needless worry. So, let me draw this all together. There's a genuine recognized pattern that heart attacks and certain heart events are somewhat more common in the early morning hours due to the body's natural rhythms. A surge in stress hormones, a rise in blood pressure and heart rate, a greater clotting tendency, and the demands of waking and rising all place extra stress on the heart at that time. This is a relative pattern, not a cause for fear, and it matters as a prompt for sensible care. Looking after your overall heart health and taking medications consistently, which lowers your risk at all times. Starting your day gently rather than leaping into sudden exertion, staying hydrated, and being ready to recognize and act urgently on heart attack and stroke symptoms, including in the morning. So, understand the pattern, take sensible overall heart care, ease into your day, stay hydrated, and be symptom ready rather than fearing the mornings. So, here's what I'll leave you with, straight and clear. First, understand the genuine pattern that heart attacks and certain heart events are somewhat more common in the early morning hours due to the body's natural rhythms. A real but relative pattern, not a cause for fear. Second, know what's happening. A natural surge in stress hormones, a rise in blood pressure and heart rate, a greater clotting tendency, and the demands of waking and rising place extra stress on the heart in the early morning. Third, respond with sensible care, not fear. Look after your overall heart health by managing blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, weight, smoking, and activity, since this lowers your risk at all times, and take your prescribed medications consistently and as directed, including any time for the morning, discussing timing with your doctor, and never stopping them on your own. Fourth, start your day gently, rising at a reasonable pace rather than leaping out of bed into sudden heavy exertion, easing into activity, and staying well hydrated, since you can become somewhat dehydrated overnight. And fifth, be ready to recognize and act urgently on heart attack and stroke symptoms at any time, including the higher risk morning, treating chest discomfort, breathlessness, sweating, nausea, or arm, jaw, or back pain as a possible heart attack and sudden weakness, face drooping, speech difficulty, or sudden vision, changes as a possible stroke, calling emergency services immediately and not dismissing morning symptoms. The early morning carries a somewhat higher heart risk, but the response is sensible care and readiness, not fear. So understanding this and looking after your heart well protects you through a higher risk time, which is well worth doing. So take care of yourself, manage your overall heart health, take your medications as directed, ease into your day, stay hydrated, and be ready to act on symptoms. And because the early morning pattern reinforces good heart care and medication timing matters, please treat your overall heart care and medication timing as something to manage with your own physician, never stopping prescribed medication on your own, and treat heart attack or stroke symptoms at any time, including the morning, as your reason to call emergency services immediately.